Hello and welcome to the next section in this course where we're going to be building a to-do list app. So what are we going to cover in this section? Basically, we want to dive deeper into core data and show how it works with a real-life application. So we're going to show how to convert user data into core data. So someone types in the name for a to-do item, whether or not it's important, we'll communicate that to core data. We want to display what's in core data back to the user. We're going to use that doing a table view, and then we're going to talk about how we can delete things from core data. That's going to be a new skill that we're going to be learning there. So with the first video here, we're going to have the to-do list kickoff. Basically, we're going to go over the sketch. I have a rough drawing of what it is that we're trying to create. We're going to set up the core data entity that's going to represent our to-do items, and then we're going to work on some visuals for the app. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, it's time to jump in and create our to-do list app. Now, in order to do this, I always like sketching out where it is that I'm going before I make an app. Trust me, I've had lots of wasted time spent where, I have an idea for an app and I just jump into Xcode and I start coding the thing, and then all of a sudden I lift my head up and say, what am I trying to do here? And I just get really lost really quickly. So we've got our to-do list little drawing here that I've created. Very simple, but it's enough to sort of get us there. So the idea is when you open the app, you're going to see this to-do list, and it's got maybe, a couple of things that you're trying to get done. If they're really important, they're going to have this big exclamation point in front of them. If someone wants to add a new to-do list item, they're going to hit this plus button. That's going to bring them to this new view controller where they can input a name and say whether or not it's important. So if it's important, that's where it's going to have the exclamation point. And if it's not, then it's just the regular title there. So that's sort of the distinction. But, someone hits this plus button, types in a name, says whether or not it's important, and taps on add, it will then be added to this list. It will automatically move the user back here. Now, let's say someone wants to complete one of these tasks. Because buying the eggs was so important, they went and ran to the store, they tap on buy eggs, it's going to take them to a view controller that shows the title of the to-do list item and then a button here that says complete. Now, if they hit complete, it's essentially the same thing as deleting the to-do item. It's saying, you know what, we've finished this. It should, and then when they hit complete, it brings them back here, and then it's no longer showing that to-do item. Okay, so that is the gist that we're looking to create here. So let's go ahead and open up Xcode. So we'll say Xcode, we want a new project, single view application, and we're going to call this to-do list. Again, make sure you have this use core data checked. Immensely important to have that. Then we'll just go through the regular stuff. Let's throw it on the desktop with all of our other things from this course. And now that we have this, you'll notice we have the to-do list.xc data model D, right? No entities in there yet, but at least we've got that open. And now we're ready to roll. So I would like to start with the core data side of things about creating the entities. Then we'll sort of move over to the visual side. But what is it that creates a to-do item, right? What is it that makes it so magical? And so first, let's just make the entity. So I'm going to say, I want to add an entity. I'm going to give this the name of to-do item. Okay, you can choose what you want to call it, but I think that's a pretty good name describing what we're trying to do. Now, the question is, what are the attributes? Well, quite simply, it's what the name is and whether or not it's important. At the end of the day, you've got those two things. You've got almost everything you need for this to-do list app. So those are the two attributes that we want to add, a name and whether or not it's important. So let's go add an attribute for the name. So we'll give it the title and name. What type? This should definitely be a string. And then we also want to add an attribute about whether it's important or not. And so if something's a yes/no situation, that's a beautiful case to use a Boolean. So we'll go ahead and select Boolean there. So with all this in place, let's go ahead and select our to-do item. So with that picked up, we can see we got the class definition for the code gen. That looks good. I think we're ready to go. And if you want to, just for fun, you can look at it in this sort of fun view and say, oh, okay, we've got the attributes important and name. That's all good. All right. So with this in place, let's go start visually adding the things that we need. And the first thing that we'll need here is a table view controller where we could list out all this information. So I'm going to firstly just go ahead and delete the view controller that we have here. It's kind of a generic name. I don't really like it. It's going to ask, do you want to remove the reference, which is that saying just remove it from the project, but don't actually delete the file. No, we want to delete it from the project. And in real life, we're going to say move to trash on that. When we do that, we're also going to go to our storyboard and delete the view controller that it's created for us there. So I'm going to select this view controller, hit that little yellow-orange circle, and then I'm going to hit the delete key. Oh, I think we'll have to select the view controller over here on the list and hit delete. And if you don't have that list showing up, you can have it open and close by this little button down here. So now we're completely blank, right? We have the clean slate. So we want to add a new table view controller. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out a table view controller just like that. And with this table view controller, it's going to be moving forward as part of a navigation controller into these other view controllers. So we also want to bring out or embed this view controller inside of a navigation controller. So then we're going to go to editor, embed in, and then navigation controller. So that sort of does the magic of getting this navigation controller, and it sets up, view controller relationship, all that. If you're confused about any of this, my previous course, Table View, or it's iOS Developer Essentials Tables Views, this will get you up to speed on all of that. But with this in place, we've got to specify that this navigation controller is the starting point. Remember, we don't have any of these have a starting arrow pointing into it. So select this navigation controller, and we're going to select the little newspaper here, the attributes inspector, and scroll down until we find, actually we want the property inspector. This is what we're looking for, is initial view controller. So if you check this, boom, look, that arrow shows up and it's saying this is the starting point of the app. So we start with this navigation controller that has this table view controller embedded in there. Now we have a storyboard version of that table view controller, but we don't have a actual file version of it. So we're going to go up and right click on this directory and say we want a new file. We want it to be a Cocoa Touch class file, and it should be a subclass of UI table view controller. So you can name this whatever you want. I think a pretty good name is to-do item table view controller, right? It's saying we're listing out a bunch of to-do items. Pretty straightforward. So we'll go ahead and hit next on that and create. This then has this new file for us. I'm going to move it up here with the app delegate. I don't want it sort of down hanging out with the data model. You two shouldn't be hanging out together. I don't know why they shouldn't be hanging out. I just felt like they shouldn't be. And so anyways, with that up there, let's go ahead and sort of work over this file a bit because, it's got some stuff that we don't need. One, this view did load's got way more comments than we need, so we'll delete those out. We don't need the did receive memory warning, but for example, number of sections here, we don't want to include that, but we do want the number of rows, so we'll delete number of sections, but this number of rows in section, we do want that, so we'll keep that. And then the self row at index path, we do want that, so I'm going to uncomment this. Get rid of that. And then there's some, other code here for like editing cells and stuff like that. We're not going to have that here. So we're just going to scroll all the way down, delete all that code. So we're left then with our table view controller. It's going to say how many rows are in there and then what cell goes inside of each. That's a pretty good place for us. So now we want to take the name of this to-do item table view controller and connect it with our storyboard. So let's go into our main.storyboard. I'm going to select this table view controller, bring back my right side menu and say this class is called to-do item table view controller. And once that autocomplete comes, I'm going to hit tab and it sort of just auto completes the rest for us and sort of gets everything checked in. So it's important that you either hit tab or enter when you do that to just sort of have everything quote unquote click into place. So just to make sure things are okay, let's go ahead and give a title here and then run this on the simulator to see if it works. So I'm going to double click here on our table view controller and I want to give this a proper name. So we're going to select this navigation item and go over to its property and give it a title. So I'm going to call this ToDo List, just like that. And look, we get that nice name. And now let's go ahead and run this on the iPhone 8 simulator and see if we can get it to show up. So we'll go ahead and just wait a second here. This is a little bit big for what we're trying to do. So let's go ahead and work on the size that we've got here. So we want to take the physical size. There we go. That'll allow it to fit. So this looks good. We've got our table view here. Now, one thing you'll notice, these lines sort of appear and disappear. What's going on here is that the device that it's trying to simulate has a higher pixel density than the screen that I'm filming this on, and this will be true for most computers that you're working with. And so it sometimes can't decide, do I show a line there? Do I not? Because they're so thin. Don't think like, oh, there's something weird with my app. You know, the lines sometimes appear, sometimes they don't. On a physical device, it's going to look completely fine. So you're good to go. Okay. So we're at a good starting point here that we have our entity and court data. We've got visually the first view controller ready to go, but we can't really list any to-do items until we have the ability to create to-do items, and we can't check off to-do items until we have the list, which we can't have the list until we can add. So really the next thing we've got to do is be able to add to-do items. So let's go ahead and add a button up here to the top right. So we're going to search for button, and we don't want a regular button, we want the bar button item. We're going to go ahead and put that up at the top. And we're going to change the system item here to add. So it's this nice looking plus button for us. Then what we want to do is have that move us to a new view controller where basically we can enter in the name and whether or not it's important. So we are going to then add a new view controller just right here. Excellent. And then we're going to select this plus button, hold down the control key on our keyboard, and we're going to do a click drag to this view controller and say we want to do a show segue. And remember, previously we learned that the show segue allows us to sort of move forwards and backwards between this. So this will allow the user to sort of, go back to the to-do list, after if they decide they don't want to enter this in. So now that we've got this new view controller, let's go ahead and add in the appropriate items that we need. So we need like a label here, then a text field, another label, a switch, and then a button down below. So let's start first with a label. We're going to go ahead and bring that near the top. And the first thing that we want to do is get the constraints right here. So the first thing is I'm going to uncheck this constraint to margins, and I'm going to have it be a certain distance from the top. 22 seems to be fine. And we'll go ahead and say just add this constraint. Then we want to make sure this is centered. So we're going to select that label, and we're going to come down and in this menu choose that it be centered horizontally in container. So we'll go ahead and add that. And then we'll double click here to change the name of this. Let me zoom in so you can see a bit more. Let me give us some space so that we can work with it. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to say name : all right, which then means below this we need to have a text field. I'm going to bring a text field just below this. Okay, now we also want this to be centered, but first let's have it be a certain distance from this label. So I'm going to do a control drag between the two, say we need vertical spacing. And next I'm going to say that this should be centered horizontally. Good. And now you notice it's really itty bitty tiny here. So let's go ahead and give it some sort of width, and kind of maybe a safe way to do this is we can say, you know what, it should be maybe like 30 from the left, 30 from the right. So that will, no matter what the screen size is, that will definitely fit inside of there. And now that we've added that, we probably didn't need to have the centered anymore because those two will ensure that it is centered, but we can also just leave that. Okay, so we've got that text field. The next thing that we need to do is the label for whether or not it's important. So I'm going to bring out another label, and we'll sort of give some distance between these so that you can see the name and this are connected, and then the switch and this label are connected, and we'll, the name for this one should be important. And we will have this be centered in the container. And we also want to do some vertical spacing here. So control click, and we now have vertical spacing. But next we need to add now a switch below here. So go ahead and search for a switch. Switch allows us to just be in a yes or no position. If we go ahead and put this below, again, control drag, let's do some vertical spacing there. And we also want this switch to be centered. Now the switch has a defined width, so we don't have to worry about what it looks like on different devices. It's always going to be that big. I am realizing with this important that I should add a colon on the end. That's what we did with the name earlier. So we want to stay consistent there. And then below all of this, we should have a button that allows us to add this. So I'm going to give it a little bit of room between these two. We're going to have this say add, and we want this to be centered. And then we also want to do a control drag. You guessed it, we want some vertical spacing there. So this should be everything that we need visually. Let's go ahead and check that out, see if it's working. Okay, it's like build succeeded. And here comes the app. Let's hit that plus button. Boom, look, this is looking impressive, right? We can switch this on and off. If we hit name, we can start, typing some stuff. You might be noticing that the keyboard didn't show. If you want to, under hardware, you can go to the keyboard and say toggle software keyboard. That'll allow it to pop up. The hotkey for that is Command K, so you can sort of have that up and down just to make sure that everything looks okay. But this looks good. This is, visually the things that we need, but now we need to go add the code for that to happen. So this is a good stopping point for us in this video. In the next one, we're going to talk about how we can make it so that when someone puts in an appropriate name and hits the switch to the spot that they want and then hits add, we put that inside of core data, save that in. I know we've done that before, but we've got to, translate the information from these two places, put it into a new object, and then actually save it there. And then we also need to have it automatically kick back to this screen. So that'll be interesting to show you the code that we need in order for that to happen.